The story begins on a bright, sunny morning as I hum to myself while packing snacks into a large picnic basket. It was a day we had all eagerly anticipated, a long-awaited family trip to the amusement park, a tradition we used to cherish when my son Thomas was just a child. Now at 21, he had grown into a tall, strong young man, full of confidence that both impressed and unsettled me. I could hardly believe how quickly the years had passed. My husband David had suggested the trip, saying it would be good for all of us to reconnect and have some fun. Life had been so busy lately, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity to catch our breath. It was supposed to be a weekend filled with laughter, cotton candy, and roller coasters, but little did I know this trip would change the way I saw my family and myself forever. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more in videos, fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. We piled into the car, feeling a mix of excitement and the comfort of being together. Logan sat in the back, lost in his phone, but occasionally looking up to share a smile. I noticed how his gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual, with a warmth that made my heart race. Though I couldn't quite explain why, I brushed off the feeling, telling myself it was just the excitement of the trip. As we arrived at the amusement park, the smell of popcorn and the sound of laughter filled the air. We spent hours racing from ride to ride, playing games and indulging in sweet treats. It was like a time capsule, reminding me of when Logan was a little boy, tugging at my hand, begging for one more ride. Now it was him leading the way, turning back every so often to make sure I was keeping up. Around midday, David decided to take a break, so Logan and I went off to explore the park on our own. We headed to the Ferris wheel, the ride we always saved for last. As the wheel carried us high above the park, a sense of calm washed over me for that moment. It was just the two of us suspended in the sky with the world below us. "You've always been there for me, haven't you?" Logan said quietly, looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully understand. "Of course," I replied, smiling. "That's what moms do." His gaze was intense, filled with something more than I could comprehend. "It's more than that," he said. "You've been more than just a mom to me. You've been everything." A chill ran down my spine. His words were gentle yet carried a weight that made my heart race. I laughed it off, trying to ease the tension. "Well, I am your mother. It's kind of my job." But Logan didn't laugh. He leaned in closer, his eyes still searching mine as if looking for something I couldn't give you. "Mean more to me than just that." He whispered. A knot formed in my stomach. This was my son. We couldn't be having this conversation. I quickly shifted, trying to distract myself. "Logan, what are you saying?" He turned away, staring out at the horizon as if he were trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But I feel something when I'm with you, something I can't ignore." I recoiled, feeling like I'd been doused with cold water. I was his mother. This was wrong. I wanted to end the conversation, but the words stuck in my throat. The ride ended, and I stood up quickly, forcing a smile. "Let's go find your dad," I said, my voice tight. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to focus on the fun, on the simple joy of being with my family, but something had shifted. Logan's gaze lingered on me more times than I cared to admit, his eyes filled with a warmth that made my skin prickle, and the worst part, a small, hidden part of me didn't want him to look away that night. We returned to the cabin we rented. David, exhausted, went straight to bed while Logan and I stayed up on the porch, the sound of crickets and rustling leaves filling the silence. Mom Logan's voice broke the stillness. "I need to tell you something." I could feel where this was going, and I tried to stop it before it started. "Logan, please," I said, my voice shaky. "Whatever you're feeling, it's not." "I can't help it," he interrupted. "I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. And I think you feel it too." My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. "Logan, this isn't right. I'm your mother." He reached for my hand. "Holding you gently, I know," he said, his voice trembling. "But when I look at you, I don't just see my mom. I see someone I can't stop thinking about." I yanked my hand away, standing up. Suddenly, "No," I said, though my voice wavered. "You're confused. It's just a phase. You'll realize it was a mistake." He stood too, closing the gap between us. "What if it's not a mistake?" he whispered. "What if?" "This is the truest thing I've ever felt." I turned away, tears in my eyes. "We can't do this, Logan," I whispered, barely able to speak. He stood there for a long moment, then nodded. Stepping back, "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I wiped away a tear, trying to collect myself. "Let's just go inside," I said. "It's late." We went back inside, the weight of what had just happened hanging between us like an unspoken truth. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew we had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure there was any going back the next morning. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting golden lines across the room. I lay awake, replaying the previous night's events over and over in my mind. It felt surreal. I was in a daze, like a bad dream I couldn't escape. I could hear David snoring softly beside me, blissfully, unaware of the storm brewing just outside our room. I needed to get away to think quietly. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, breathing in the cool air and the familiar scent of the woods. But the moment my hand touched the counter, the flood of emotions came rushing back. This wasn't a dream. What happened last night was real. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Logan standing in the doorway, looking at me uncertainly. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile, but it felt weak, fragile. He stepped closer. "About last night," I cut him off. "Logan, let's not do this. It was late. We were both tired. We said things we didn't mean. Let's just forget. Get it, okay?" But he didn't look away. His eyes were intense, filled with something I couldn't deny. "I can't forget it," he said quietly. "And I don't think you can either." I turned back to the counter, trying to steady myself. "We have to, Logan," I whispered. "There's no other choice. You say that," he said, stepping closer. "But I don't believe you." Just then, I heard David moving in the bedroom, and the tension between Logan and me snapped. I shot him a look, and he stepped back, retreating to the living room. David entered the kitchen, oblivious to the undercurrent of emotion. "Morning, sweetheart," he mumbled, wrapping his arms around me. "Morning," I managed to say. Though it felt distant, the rest of the day dragged on, and every moment with Logan felt heavy, charged. David continued to laugh and joke, completely unaware of the tension that hung between us. As the sun began to set, David suggested heading back to the cabin for an early dinner. I agreed, desperate to retreat from the growing storm inside me. Back at the cabin, I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a focus that bordered on frantic. Logan lingered nearby, his presence making every movement feel too sharp, too loaded. At one point, our shoulders brushed, and I flinched. "You're avoiding me," he said softly. "I'm not," I replied through clenched teeth, not daring to look up. "You are," he insisted, "and I get it, but we can't ignore this forever." I set the knife down, my hands shaking. I turned to face him. "We have to," I whispered fiercely. "This isn't right, Logan. It can't happen." Before he could respond, David called from the living room, asking what was taking so long. I quickly composed myself, forcing a smile. "Dinner's almost ready." I called back. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We ate in silence, the only sounds being the clink of silverware and David's occasional commentary I couldn't look at. Logan couldn't risk meeting his eyes when dinner ended. I excused myself, claiming exhaustion, but as I closed the bedroom door behind me, the tears came hot and bitter. A soft knock on the door made me freeze. I didn't want to face him, but he came in anyway. Logan stood in front of me, his eyes full of longing and pain. "We need to talk," he whispered. I shook my head, wiping out my tears. "No, we don't, we can't." But he didn't listen. He kneeled in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please don't push me away." I looked down at him, and in that moment, everything inside me shattered. His touch was gentle, desperate, and it was as though we had crossed a point of no return. The kiss that followed wasn't gentle, it was hungry, filled with every emotion we both tried so hard to suppress. When it was over, we lay together, trembling, the silence between us, heavy with the knowledge that what had just happened could never be over, be undone. "What have we done?" I whispered. Logan kissed my forehead and whispered something we can't take back, but I don't regret it, neither did I, and that terrified me more than anything. The next few days felt like an endless haze, where the world seemed out of focus. We went about our routines, but everything felt different. Every glance from Logan felt like an unspoken conversation, a shared secret that neither of us could escape. David remained oblivious, happy, and carefree, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I could feel it in every word, every touch, every moment I spent with Logan at night, when the house was still and David was fast asleep. Logan and I would share quiet moments, stealing glances across the room. Sometimes we would sit together, but the distance between us was always palpable. The memory of what we had shared loomed between us like a shadow we couldn't outrun one. Even evening while I was preparing dinner, Logan appeared in the kitchen. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching me. I could feel his eyes on me, and it made my heart race, even though I tried to ignore it. "You've been quiet," he finally said, his voice soft, but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "I'm just trying to focus on what's in front of me," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. There's a lot to do, but I knew it wasn't just the dinner that was weighing on me. It was everything. Everything that had happened between us. Everything we were avoiding. I can't stop thinking about it. He admitted, his voice barely a whisper, about what happened and what we both felt. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Logan, we've talked about this already. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness," but he shook his head, stepping closer. "It wasn't a mistake. I've never felt more certain about anything in my life. You can't keep pretending it didn't happen." I stepped back, my pulse quickening. "This isn't right, Logan. We can't go down this road. It's not healthy." He took a deep breath, then reached for my hand. "Mom, I don't care what's right or wrong anymore. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you about us." His words were like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. Yet something inside me wanted to listen, wanted to give in. I yanked my hand away, shaking my head. "No, we can't do this. This is not us. You're my son." "But what if it's more than that?" he pressed. "What if we're not just mother and son anymore? What if this is something else? Something real?" Tears filled my eyes, and I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know what this is, Logan, but it can't be this." Logan didn't respond. He just stood there watching me, and for a moment I thought he might say something else, something that would change everything, but he didn't. He simply nodded and turned away, leaving me standing in the kitchen. Frozen. The days that followed were filled with awkward silences and tense moments. Every time Logan looked at me, I could feel the intensity of his gaze, a gaze that seemed to see right through me. And every time I felt that same tightening in my chest, that mix of guilt, fear, and desire, I couldn't shake. I tried to keep my distance, to focus on anything other than the emotions swirling inside me. But every time I looked at Logan, the weight of our shared secret threatened to consume me. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, Logan came out to join me. We sat in silence, the only sounds the rustling of the trees and the distant calls of night animals. "I know it's hard," he said, breaking the silence, "but I don't regret what happened, and I can't keep pretending it didn't matter." I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know what to say, Logan." "You don't have to say anything," he replied quietly. "I just needed you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I can't not when you mean so much to me." The sincerity in his voice shook me to my core, and for the first time I realized that the path ahead of us was not one we could easily walk away from. The love he spoke of, no matter how wrong it felt, was real, and there was nothing I could do to erase it from my heart. I stood up, brushing away a tear that had escaped my eye. "We have to stop this, Logan, for our own good. This can't happen again." He stood too, his face softening, but his eyes still filled with that same deep longing. "I understand," he said, his voice breaking, "but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." The days after that conversation were filled with an unbearable tension. I tried to pretend things were normal, but it was impossible. Every time Logan looked at me, I saw the truth in his eyes, and every time I looked away, I felt like I was betraying myself. Finally, on the last night of our trip, as the stars sparkled above us and the cool night air filled my lungs, I realized that I couldn't run from this anymore. The emotions, the confusion, the guilt, none of it could be ignored. Logan and I stood together once more under the vast sky, and for a moment everything else faded away in the quiet of the night. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. But then I pulled away. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice shaking. Logan didn't say anything, he just watched me, and in his eyes I saw both the pain and the understanding. He knew I was right, but he also knew that neither of us would ever forget what had happened, no matter how hard we tried. We walked back inside, side by side, but the distance between us was already growing. I knew it wasn't over. Not for either of us. The consequences of our actions would follow us, always lingering in the background, impossible to forget. And even as I lay in bed that night listening to the soft sounds of the world outside, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside the cabin, but it felt different. The air was thick with something unspoken, something that had changed everything. I lay in bed for a long time, unable to move my mind, replaying everything, every glance, every touch, every word spoken between Logan and me. It was a nightmare. I couldn't escape from a truth that felt suffocating. David was already up when I left the room, blissfully unaware of the storm that had been raging between Logan and me. He greeted me with his usual cheer, a warm smile that felt strangely distant to me now. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead as he passed me in the kitchen. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound normal, but it came out tight, forced. My smile felt like a mask, and I couldn't hide the emptiness inside. I busied myself with breakfast, pretending that everything was fine, though the weight of what had happened still hung heavily over me. Logan came in shortly after, sitting at the table with a quiet gaze. He didn't speak, but his eyes were filled with something I couldn't place, a mixture of regret, longing, and pain. I couldn't look at him for too long. I couldn't bear it. His presence was like a constant reminder of the line we had crossed, and the more I tried to push it away, the stronger it became. The day went by slowly, each moment dragging on, as I did my best to avoid any more private conversations with Logan. Every time our paths crossed, there was an invisible barrier between us, one that we both knew was there, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge. In the afternoon, we packed up and prepared to leave the cabin. The ride back home was quiet, the usual banter and laughter. Absent, I could feel Logan's gaze on me once again, but this time I couldn't bring myself to meet it. I was too afraid of what I might see in his eyes. The familiar sights of home should have been comforting, but they only added to the heaviness that had settled in my heart. I thought that once we were back in our own space, everything would return to normal, but I knew that was a lie. Nothing would ever be normal again. David was busy unpacking the car, and I stood in the doorway watching him, but my mind was elsewhere. Logan came inside behind me, and for a moment I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He just stood there, looking at me with that same unreadable expression. I could feel the tension building again, the desire to say something, but the words wouldn't come instead. We stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, until finally he turned and left the room. I couldn't stop myself from following him, though I didn't know why. It was like I was being pulled toward him against my better judgment. When I reached the living room, Logan was standing by the window, his back to me. I hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to do or say, but then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know things are messed up, but I can't just forget it. I can't pretend like it never happened." I stood frozen, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment where everything had to come to a head, but I didn't know how to fix it. How could I? "I know," I replied softly, my voice barely above a whisper, "but we have to move on. We have to forget about it." His back stiffened, and I could see the frustration in his posture. "You can't tell me to forget. Get it? You can't make me pretend like I don't feel this way. I can't just let it go. It's not that easy." I swallowed hard, the pain in my chest almost unbearable. "Logan," I whispered, "we can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending it's wrong." He turned around slowly, his eyes full of emotion. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel. I don't know how to change it." I took a step back, my whole body trembling. "You have to, for both of us, for our family." But even as I said the words, I knew that what we had done couldn't be undone. The feelings, the connection, the bond, whatever it was already there and it wasn't going away. Logan didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes locked with mine, a silent understanding passing between us. He didn't have to say anything more. We both knew what had happened, and we both knew that it had changed everything, and in that moment I realized that no matter how hard I tried to move on, no matter how much I wanted to pretend it had never happened, I would always carry it with me. It would always be a part of who we were. As I turned away and walked back into the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, all the guilt, the pain, the confusion. It was a burden I wasn't sure I could carry, but no matter what, I had to keep going. I had to keep pretending, keep smiling, keep moving forward, because that was what family did, even when the truth was too painful to face. We kept going because we had no choice. And so we would live our lives, each of us holding our secrets close, never speaking of what had. For next part, subscribe for more. Don't forget to click the notification bell icon to stay notified.